Hi friends, thanks for joining today. Today we're going to be covering the first of 5-part series in transitioning your dropshipping business into a inventory held business. So if you're already dropshipping, you want to bring your inventory in to a country, a new business, or you're a brand that wants to launch into a new country or a new region, or you're a manufacturer who wants to go from B2B sales to B2C sales online, this is a good option for you to go and take a look at, because we're going to cover how to forecast your demand and then how to go through the steps of bringing your inventory in, holding it locally, and fulfilling those e-commerce orders. Let's go and take a look. Now, My House to Warehouse Training Academy is a resource for you guys. Link is in the description for the Facebook group. Don't miss these trainings. Next lesson is going to be Thursdays 10 a.m. here from Singapore, and you can watch on the US on Wednesday evenings. So before we jump in, let me introduce myself. My name is Donovan. I'm a supply chain specialist specializing in e-commerce. So what we're going to be doing is forecast demand. I've done this for quite a few customers, my largest being Apple. And then most recently, I've been running a fulfillment warehouse shipping over 500 orders per day for e-commerce. So what we're going to do is bring that knowledge to you in terms of how to forecast demand, and then from there, how to bring your inventory and hold it locally. So it's quite a few benefits to holding inventory locally. Not only that there's shorter lead time for your customer, but also you can be much more responsive to any customer changes that they have with their order. Reverse logistics is a lot easier. Items arrive all together. If you're bringing in multiple items from different dropshippers on your website, sometimes they can arrive separately. You also have the ability to QC check your products there at the warehouse, so it's a little bit safer. Make sure you have the right quality, the right color, things of this nature. All right. So I'm assuming before we start that you've already started doing this, that you already have done dropship or tested the market in some way. If you haven't, make sure that you do a test run, have inventory available. So you have to budget for that. Make sure that you take into account your development costs. So you're going to have to develop a website front end to appeal to the local market. Make sure the language is corrected and products that they like. So that development cost there. Also marketing costs. Have some available marketing dollars to push into your business. Make it available and known to that new market. And then also know that logistics is going to be a little bit more expensive as you're drop shipping, since you're going to be fulfilling outside the country, shipping individual items as they're ordered into that country. Logistics costs, shipping costs can be quite high, so make sure you budget for that as well. If you'd like to go and take a look at how to drop ship from overseas, you can go over the customs in a previous video. You can also see that in the description if you'd like to check out how to do e-commerce customs clearance. Also, when you test your new market, make sure you have some goals in mind. Main thing is how many units you need to sell before you feel that the market is secure for you to do a full launch. And also any exposure goals. Do you want to get your product in certain people's hands? Do you want to make it widely available into a certain market? Once you reach that goal, then you feel confident in launching fully. Know those ahead of time before you dive in. And know that you need to be collecting as much data as you can as you go in. At least as many units as you're selling through each channel, and if you can, some of the customer demographic information as well. So we're going to use that to do forecasting going forward. So our 5 lessons for this locally held inventory study unit that we're kicking off today. Lesson 1 that we're doing now is forecast demand, because we want to basically know our investment. We'll need to have inventory purchased. There's going to be a lead time for it coming in. You need to have some sales on hand. So we're going to have quite a large investment of inventory, about 3 months. So we need to know what that purchase is going to look like. And the same demand data is going to be useful for deciding our fulfillment options, whether we use a 3PL as a third-party provider of services, something like Amazon FBA. And then also we have the option of doing it in-house. So knowing what our demand is going to give us a good idea of what space we need, what resources we need to allocate to do that fulfillment inside our own house. Now, purchasing, logistics, customs delivery, this will be our 3rd lesson to make sure that we can bring that bulk shipment through. It's going to be a little bit different than doing e-commerce, small parcel delivery in some cases. Also inventory receiving, so you will need to know how to receive your inventory, what to look for, how to keep it, how to store it. So we'll go through that and make sure that we have good control of our inventory. And then finally we'll go over order fulfillment, how to receive your orders, pack your orders correctly, and then send them out for delivery. So look forward to that, those 5 lessons. Let's go ahead and divide into some more demand forecast benefits. So the main thing is going to be knowing your operations, so they know how much to purchase, how much to manufacture. Your logistics company is going to know what the transportation and storage requirements are, so they can make good decisions so that things arrive on time. Your finance is going to make available cash to pay those invoices within the terms, either 30 days, 45 days, something like that. Those invoices are going to be due. With the demand forecast, you kind of have a better idea of what cash needs to be available when, budget a bit better. Now, sales need to set targets, so knowing what the demand is going to be naturally, like it set a little bit higher target based on how well they think they can accomplish their sales goals. So setting those targets a little bit higher is important for sales. No point in setting a low target that's going to be normally met by your natural demand. And also marketing can benefit a lot from demand forecasts to see how effective any marketing campaigns are. So we're going to be covering these 3 simple models today. Very easy for everyone to access the linear and moving average methods. We'll also go over exponential smoothing. Requires Excel, so if you don't have Excel, go ahead and look in the comments below. I'll give you the timestamp to jump to the next area, so you don't need to watch exponential smoothing if you don't have Excel available. Alright, so diving in, we're going to be covering this lesson today out of demand-driven forecasting. So this is a really nice book. They have a great perspective that I like to share. They say most textbooks in academic teaching are focused on validating the equations rather than practical applications. In many cases, this is like teaching someone how to drive a car. You really do not need to know how to build the car. So what they're saying here is a lot of training around this subject focuses on the actual mathematical formulas and the reasons why the statistics and things work, rather than actual practical applications of it and how to use it effectively to get good forecasts. So this book focuses on that. If you'd like to take a better look at that, the description has a link, affiliate link for that. So if you purchase from that, I'll get a small commission. Good resource for you to look into more detail on what we're covering today. So our first method we're going to cover is linear. So you may have heard this before, maybe during your public school days, of finding a line of best fit to match a given data set. You have a graph, you plot the data on the graph, and then you take your ruler and kind of match up the best line to match that data. So this is kind of what that is in more of a practical application for forecasting. You have your data set here. On the bottom is our months, January through December. We're going to be trying to forecast for that following January. And we have a few units of sales every month. So what we can do is create that line of best fit, just eyeballing it, and get an idea of what's going to sell. Excel has an option if you map this data out into a graph. It can do this calculation for you. So we're going to go through that really quick here. Go into your input and select your data. There's a little chart button on the side. Select that chart button and it'll pop up with a few options. In this case, I chose the line with the dots. You can choose any one that you think might work well for you. And once you hit that, it's going to pop up with a chart. You can see that behind. All you need to do is right-click on the line itself of that graph, and it'll pop up with this dialog box, and you can add a trend line. So adding a trend line is what we did in a straight line fashion. You can see here there are different options available based on how your data is distributed. Straight line should be fine. So go to make a trend line just like that. You can see here, just eyeballing it, you can see 10 or 11 units are going to be forecasted for that next January using that straight line method. So just to reemphasize, Excel is just kind of an extra tool to make it a bit easier. This straight line method can be done with pencil and paper and a ruler. No real reason to have Excel, just to make your life easier. So be sure it's still accessible to you if you want to do that. Our next method that's accessible to anyone is moving average. So you can use something like Google Docs to make this calculation. Have our data here on the side, and we'll do the average just below. So moving average, in this case, I'm taking the 3 months moving average. So it's taking the previous 3 months of data to estimate the demand for the following month. So in this case, I have January, February, March, taking the average of that and assuming that the average of those 3 months will be what the demand will be in April. So you can go to see that here populated on the chart and also on the graph. Now as the average moves, you can see that when we do a calculation for May, it's only using February, March, April, because this is 3 months moving. Only the previous 3 months will be used. So same as we move through the forecast. So if we're going to be calculating for this missing month of January, we'll use October, November, December, that moving average of those 3 months to calculate what's expected in January. So moving average, quite simple to use. One thing that I want to point out is here during this upward trend of data, we have 4 points of moving upward, but during this point the average is actually decreasing. So keep in mind that your average will be a bit slow to react to these increases or decreases in your actual data. Later it'll pop up as that 3 month average catches up with that upward trend in data. You can see that average also increase. Another way to look, we're going to compare it against a 5 month average. So 5 month average is in green. It'll take the previous 5 months of data, so January through May, to calculate June forecast. So the same method, it'll be populated here on the graph, and as the 5 months move, the next 5 months of data for the forecasting month will be calculated. So if you want to use the last 5 months for January, it'll use the months shown. So in the same case of the rising data, we know that the forecast for the 3 months data is going to be a bit delayed in its reaction to that 3 months. But you can also see that the 5 months is even less of a reaction. So both are delayed. The 3 months have a very high reaction. The 5 months have a bit less of a reaction. So it's a little bit more smooth in the data. So this is having to do with how reactive you want your forecast to be to the demand. If you use a shorter average period, it's going to be much more reactive to the forecast. So if you're going through a period where you know that your forecast is going to be increasing quite rapidly or decreasing quite rapidly, you may want to use a shorter time frame, average months. So 3 months is a good rule of thumb. If you know that your data is quite smooth and you just want to take out the noise, the monthly slightly up, some months slightly down, want to find the average, a real more accurate average, use a longer time frame. So in this case, 5 months, it was a little bit less reactive to that monthly data. You can get a little bit more safe number from that so that you don't over purchase. Moving on, we can see this in another way by taking the highest average amount and the lowest average amount and comparing that for the 3 months and the 5 months. We can see that it is less reactive to that demand. So keep that in mind as you go through whether you want your forecast to be very reactive or less reactive. Now moving on for exponential smoothing. So this is the point where if you don't have Excel, don't worry too much about this. Use the other two methods, they're still quite good. If you do have Excel, we'll go and do a quick how-to on how to get this working. So exponential smoothing, go to the data tab and select this data analysis. So data analysis is actually an add-in for Excel. So if you don't have it, you have to go into the options, go to the add-ins, and then make sure it's activated. After you have that in, go to select exponential smoothing, go to OK, and it's going to give you this selection screen. Or first, it's going to ask for your data table. Go ahead and select your data on the side. Do leave an empty space for that month that you want to forecast for. The next is going to be our smoothing function. So we'll go through that in a minute. Basically, number one, it's a range between 1 and 0. So if you put a 1, it's going to be a straight line across for your graph. So it's going to be very unreactive to your data. And then if you put a 0, it's going to be very reactive to your data. It's going to follow it exactly. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. For now, just know that it's between 1 and 0. Now this tab, this check box is if you included your titles in your data set, so you can let Excel know to ignore that title. And then this is the area you want to put your data for the output once it does a calculation. Just put that next to the month, that first cell, and it'll populate all the way down automatically. Now this one is for your statistical data. So if you're familiar with stats, your R squared, R standard deviation, these kind of things, Excel can give you those numbers. But if you're not familiar with it, they're not going to make much sense. We'll cover that in a later episode, our lesson, when we do more advanced forecasting. All right, and then finally we have the option for a graph. You don't necessarily need a graph if you want to compare multiple data sets. So if you want to change your smoothing, you can get your data first. But if you're just looking at one data set, go ahead and click it and you can see a chart using that. All right, so this is what our chart is going to look like. You can see in blue our data is following quite closely our forecast off of our demand there. Now, exponential smoothing is basically a way to weight data. So the data is weighted a little bit more to the front, the more recent months, depending on how high your smoothing factor is. So we talked about that factor between 1 and 0. So if it's 1, it's not going to be very reactive. If it's 0, it's very reactive to most recent months. So we're going to take it into comparison to our average, right? Because we talked about previously, if we use a 3-month average, it's more reactive. If we use a 5-month average, it's less reactive. But this is taking into a little bit more data. So taking your full data set, and then it's going to weight it a little bit more towards the front or less to the front of your data set. So let me go and explain what I'm talking about here in our slides. So we talked about our moving average, right? Every month we'll have an average of the previous 3 months. Now each month is going to have a weight of 4 blocks. So we use this as a visual example for the even weight. When you create an average, a moving average, each month has an equal weight of 4 blocks. But what if you want to have more weight into more recent data? The idea being that the more recent data is more accurate, so you want to have more weight on that. So using exponential smoothing, you can do that. You can put more weight on the front, and by doing that, we use this factor. So we can adjust the factor to give us more weight. So by doing that, let's spread our example out among our full data set here. If we do a value closer to 0, it's going to be more reactive. So you can see the weight is moving from the previous data more to the more recent data. So the more recent data, see how much weight is there. So it's going to be very reactive to the more recent data. Now see that compared to something that's less reactive. So our green data is going to be less reactive. We're going to compare that along the same lines. We have our weights here. Every month has 4 weights. But since it's less reactive, less weight is going to shift to the front before we get to the point where our exponential smoothing is done. So this is when the less weight is done. So our smoothing factor is going to be closer to 1. Alright, so as you can see that compared, you can see the blue line is quite reactive to the historical data in red. Every time there's a jump in the previous month, then the next month the thing will jump also. Alright, so then dampening is a smoothing factor that we've been talking about here. Dampening in this case is a good rule of thumb. 0.7 to 0.8 will give you a pretty good forecast. Generally speaking, it's not too reactive, nice and smooth. Alright, so one thing I want to emphasize here, these forecast methods only give you one step ahead view. One step means the period. So the period that you're looking at, if you're looking at monthly data, you're using a few months of data, it'll give you the next month of estimated forecast. If you're looking at quarterly data, it'll give you the next quarter of forecast. So the more farther into the future you want to look, the more previous history you need to have. So if you want to look 3 months in the future, I recommend having at least 9 months of history. More is better. If you want to look a few years in the future, you need to have a few years of data, kind of see what your overall trends are, where your forecast is going to end up. So the further you get, if you have a few months of data, you know your first month is going to be pretty accurate. The months after that are going to get more and more inaccurate because anything can happen during that time. The forecast can go up, the forecast can drop. There's a lot more possibilities that can happen the further out you get from that next period. So just be aware of that as you make your estimating decisions, that you may not be as accurate as you thought. Also, quantitative versus qualitative. So quantities that we're talking about, we've been looking at the quantities as qualitative data. So we're looking at the forecast, the numbers. Also, you want to see quality. So the qualitative data is going to be something like your marketing team has decided to do a promotion in the next month. So you need to make sure you talk to your marketing, talk to your sales team, see if there's any big orders coming up. Make sure that that forecast that's about the quantities also includes that quality data. That coming in the future, there's going to be some promotion, some order. We need to include that into the forecast because the previous history that we're using to project forward is not going to include that. So include both qualitative and quantitative data. Now seasonality, I have a rose here to describe for seasonality of Valentine's Day. It's quite popular during that period for people to purchase roses. So during the rest of the year, very low demand for roses. Every now and then someone will purchase, but still low compared to the Valentine's period. So when that period comes around, there will be a huge spike in demand for roses. So it's possible that your products will follow something similar. During part of the year, it would be very normal demand. You can forecast it quite easily with average or exponential smoothing to get a nice forecast going for most of the year. But then during a certain period of time, during that year, there will be a huge spike that you're not going to be able to forecast accurately with these methods that we covered. So we're going to go through that at a later date. You're going to see the card pop out, and you can see in the description when we cover how to do seasonality in our forecast. Now next up we want to take a look at regression analysis. So regression analysis, you can see here you got TV, radio, and newspaper, and these plot points. So on the bottom is the advertising dollars spent on each of these methods, and then on the vertical axis is the sales that we had following that same time period. So what we're trying to do here with regression analysis is comparing the two. So you want to see how effective your marketing was on each of those channels. So you're going to be able to use regression analysis to see the connection, see the correlation, see if the advertising dollars that you spent had a reaction in your demand. So if we go back, you can see that maybe TV and radio had a pretty good reaction. The more dollars you spend, you're going to see an upward trend in the sales for the most part. You get over to newspaper, it gets very scattered. There's not a very good correlation between the two. I don't really see a very effective use of marketing dollars there because it's not a direct relationship that we can see that more dollars spent on newspaper leads to more sales. So this is another topic we'll discuss, regression analysis, to determine how effective your marketing program is. So we're going to pop that up for a card for you to check out or down in the description for marketing. Going forward, do keep in mind, it's going to take a lot of data to make sure that these get more accurate. 3 to 5 years is the general rule of thumb for seasonality and regression analysis, so just keep that in mind. If you're just starting out, don't worry about looking at these more. It's okay, you can do straight line, it's fine. Moving average, also okay. And if you're able to do exponential smoothing, stick to those. Don't worry too much about these more advanced methods of forecasting. Alright, so our necessary info, we did this forecasting exercise to go and find out our estimated demand. This is mainly for our 3PL quote that we're going to be covering in our next lesson. Also to know the purchase price, so we need finance needs to be aware of how much we're going to be spending, and our customs clearance cost, any duties, any taxes we need to pay as well. Our physical volume weight is important for logistics. Generally, shipping charges will use one of these methods to calculate. Air freight will be for weight. Sea freight will have the volume. So you need to know kind of how many units, what the size is, what the weight is, so you can get a good quote and budget appropriately for the logistics costs associated with this. So demand is quite important to cover. So this is why we're starting here. Since we started here, we covered everything. You should be able to predict your demand. Go and give it a shot. Next week we're going to be covering how our fulfillment options. So you can join us here. We'll continue to go through how to transition from a dropship model or testing the market into actually holding inventory locally. So stay tuned. Next week here, My House to Warehouse Training Academy. We'll have the lesson. Join in the description below. There's a link to the Facebook group. And stay tuned next week, 10 a.m. from Singapore on Thursdays. And you can watch from the U.S. on Wednesday evening. Thanks very much for joining us, guys. We will see you next week. Bye-bye.